Yes, welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere, and today we are focusing on Brighton. They've had an impressive start under their 31-year-old manager and an even more impressive transfer window. Listen to this, £200 million spent. On the show today, we have our tactics writer, Liam Tharme, and also German football writer, Seb Stafford-Bloor. The question we're asking is there something exciting happening with the Seagulls this season? Right, let's bring people into it. Liam, let's start with you on this, because it has been a dream start for Brighton. 9 goals in 3 games. It's 6 points in their first 2 Premier League games, including that dramatic stoppage time win against Manchester United. Wow, these are things fans dream of. I mean, fans couldn't have asked for much more, surely, and especially with a new coach in hand as well.
No, it's a great start. I think it's funny, really, because Brighton made a habit of starting seasons really well. In each of the last 3 seasons, they've won at least 4 of the opening 6. They were actually top, I think, after 2 games last season. They won the first couple of games 4-1 under Zerbi, and started well, I think, a couple of seasons ago under Potter as well. So they've done this a lot and perhaps tailed off more during seasons or had a bit of a blip around winter. So it's a way they do tend to start, but as you say, it's very different doing that, I think, under an established coach versus under a new coach coming in, trying to implement new ideas. You generally give him sort of a grace period of, oh, he needs time on I know he's had a full pre-season, but generally he needs time on the training pitch to implement his ideas. But I'd feel compelled to point out margins in those games either way. That offside goal from Joshua Zerbi, which is so marginally close to going in, changes the game. The penalty decision overturned at Goodison Park and the Ashley Young red card. So there's definitely an alternative reality that's very plausible, where Brighton aren't 6 points from 6 and through in the cup as well. But yeah, I think you can't really complain about that.
Yeah, I feel, Seb, at the beginning of every season, we always get quite excited by certain teams. Tottenham, not too long ago, we were talking about what a great start, but we shall see how it all pans out. We'll talk about Fabian Hürzeler a little later on, Seb, but from you, from an outside perspective, watching Brighton start, how do you feel about it?
I feel really good. I think I felt pretty confident with Hürzeler going in, just because I didn't really have any reservations about his age or his inexperience. This has been a situation he's encountered before in his career. Always seems to take it in a stride. Also, I felt that he was a pretty good match for what he was inheriting, style-wise, the expectation around how people want Brighton to play, but also the kind of players that were going to be under his command, particularly the age profile of that squad. If you look back at his work at St. Pauli, he did extremely well with young players. He was able to forge a couple of really good young careers from very little. And so logically, I know football doesn't always work like this, but logically, give him a higher level of talent with the same profile, things are probably going to go well.
Yeah, for sure. Liam, I was listening to Talk of the Devils yesterday, and I think Manchester United fans are beginning to think Brighton are their bogey team, or that at least they've earned the right. Look, since the 27-2018 season of Brighton's first Premier League campaign, only Manchester City have picked up more top-flight victories against Manchester United than the Seagulls. Manchester City 8, Seagulls 7. How did they manage to do it this time? And I know they almost did it as well. Let's not forget that.
No, that's true. Yeah, I know Carl Anker is very much fed up of Brighton playing Manchester United. So it's funny because they've done it now consistently. There's been different Manchester United bosses. I think Mourinho's come to the Amex twice and lost. And then Ralf Rangnick as well, and obviously Ten Hag now and Houghton, Potter, etc. all beat them. So it doesn't even seem to need to be a one consistent manager against another. I thought what was really interesting was sort of the use of the high line in this game, whereas we're used to the Zerbi previously being very aggressive in the press, but it's almost we're pressing because we want the ball close to the opposition goal and we want to have those turnovers in the final third, make chances from them. He'd often talk about the courage to defend man-to-man. He'd push centre-backs up the pitch, and you knew that with that you were going to get chances at either end. Either you're going to win it back and a good chance to score, or the opposition might play through you and they've got a chance. Whereas this time, and it was with, again, the same back four that we saw at Everton, which is fielding sort of a central midfielder, Jack Hinchelwood at a left-back, so a right-footer, and Lewis Dunker, right-footer at left centre-back. So a bit awkward in terms of build-up. They sort of played down the right an awful lot, put Joel Veltman in an advanced position. But defensively, we're just really, really high. And it actually came at their detriment for the goal when the through ball went through. Amad Diallo managed to cut inside and score, but for the most part, you'd think it was the kind of approach that United would love to play against, but they just couldn't get that pass in behind in the run into Rashford or into Bruno, timed quite right. I thought it worked really, really well. They'd caught Everton offside quite a few times as well in the first game. So it's definitely a subtle difference, I'd say, to De Zerbi's style. But quite interesting.
Yeah, we're going to go into some of the transfers Brighton have made in just a sec. But one in particular last night, I mean, he didn't last that long. Matt O'Reilly, Liam, the guy that just brought in from Celtic. A lot of hype around him. Clattered against Crawley in the EFL Cup win last night. But, I mean, it's such a shame because there was so much excitement around him coming to Brighton.
No, I think so. I mean, look, the positive you hope is that it's not a particularly serious injury, but also he's a young guy. You look at the players Brighton have brought in this window, everyone's under 25. I think there's a CIS report I was looking at, a great bunch of nerds who do loads of really good analytical stuff on football, and they'd actually contrasted the average age of signings, I think, possibly for sort of 5 years in the 2010s or the end of the 2010s to the past 5 years now. And Brighton's average age has gone down about 4 or 5 years, or maybe 3 or 4 years, sorry. So there's a clear focus on getting players in who are maybe not the finished article. We've seen this, season's gone on, and then you look at now one of the reasons we're talking about them, I suppose, is this is a whole, maybe back to the start of the cycle, because we've seen those players come through, develop well, be sold on for more money to bigger clubs, and now then they've got the funds where they can sort of, I guess, go through that cycle again, but maybe with more players or better players, and that's why obviously they're really starting to splash the cash this window.
Seb, we talk about the talent and they've spent money on it, and actually some of that talent hasn't even started yet in the Premier League, which shows a really solid strength in depth. There's a German signing, Brian Gruder from Mainz. You've cast your eye on him. What do we make of him?
He's a wonderfully gifted player. Last season was probably his first as a kind of a proper Bundesliga regular at Mainz, and it was tricky because Mainz came into the season under a very jaded Bo Svensson, who'd done wonderful things at the club but had kind of run out of steam, and the team wilted. They went through a very difficult period just before and just after the Winterpause, and then in came Ben Henriksen, who rejuvenated the side, got them playing quickly, and tellingly to Gruder's strengths. So I'm sure all the Brighton fans who've been on YouTube to find his highlights will know this already, but wonderfully expressive ball carrier, so ambitious in possession, just like one of those. I suppose it's not quite a straight line, but I would draw a little bit of a comparison to someone like a very young Bernardo Silva in terms of how he drifts from outside to in. His distribution is not there yet. That's something that he has to learn. But Mainz were a very vertical team under Henriksen. He tried to get them playing with as little fear and as much expression as possible. And I suppose, like in the context of German football as a whole, I think there are 3 players who Julian Nagelsmann and the DFB are really excited about for the kind of the coming generation. One is probably Rocco Reitz from Borussia Mönchengladbach. Another is Angelo Stiller from Stuttgart. Who's more of a number 6, who can play in a variety of midfield roles. And the third is Gruder, because just before the European Championship, him and Reitz were called up as sort of, that thing that international managers do. They kind of bring them into squads as a sort of, it's almost like an internship in a way, isn't it? Come in, feel the place out, get used to some of the bigger names and play in this environment. Gruder is, I think, with the right handling, going to just have a wonderful career, and I actually think Brighton have done extremely well with the fee. I think he's well worth it, and as long as everybody's patient and accepts that he's not a finished product, I know that's a difficult thing to ask, but he has all the talent in the world.
Yeah, that's what we all like to hear, talent coming to Brighton. Liam, you've spoken about sort of De Zerbi and also Hürzeler and how perhaps their systems are similar, different a little earlier on. But I guess even within this system right now, and we could even say with De Zerbi, Brighton can be a little naive. You spoke about that high line, and Man United weren't clinical, even though they got a goal disallowed. Certain teams might come there, Manchester City, and just go, I see you, and I'm going to take you out.
Yeah. That used to be one of Guardiola's favourite things with Potter, was he praised Graham Potter so much after he sort of dismounted him 4-0. So yeah, there's definitely part of that. There's a learning process. I think where he's definitely different is he seems a little bit less dogmatic, at least in the way he speaks about the game. And I'm always cautious of with some coaches. You think what they say and what they do, they sort of use the media as a way of perhaps playing a game, or they're not going to give away all their secrets, so to speak. But De Zerbi actually got the impression that he was sort of so passionate a lot of the time, and perhaps a little bit emotional, that he did feel rather quite honest in terms of his like, no, we have to play this way. I don't know any other way to play. His style felt very much moulded in how he wanted his teams to play when he was a player as a number 10. Hürzeler sort of spoken of not having had the playing career that some players might have had, but actually that being a real benefit. It allows him to see the game ever so slightly differently. So there's perhaps a lot similar in terms of attack. It's still quite quite a big build-up team that want to play out short initially. The midfield perhaps isn't quite as structured in terms of seeing those two number 6s right on the edge of the box and trying to work those organised patterns. There was a great moment on match day 1 at Everton where Mats Viefa took the ball with his back to his own goal, and by the looks of it was trying to play a rehearsed pattern where the ball went into his feet and he'd clip it out to the wing, but could clearly see the winger was coming in to press him and knew what he was going to do, and tried to sort of sort his own feet out and couldn't do it quickly enough and fell over the ball, and there was a turnover. So I'd expect him to be a little bit more flexible, but I think that's generally the case with teams now anyway. So much analysis gets done. I think starting 11s tend to be less consistent than ever before anyway, that I think managers are finding just naturally, I think, a lot more flaws in trying to play that fixed plan A the whole time. And I think last season showed, there's perhaps a really good window where that can have a bit of a shock factor. Feels a bit disrespectful, but that impact straight away where teams don't really know how you're playing, have to figure you out, then you play them again a second time that season, or they've got more tape they can watch of how teams have worked against you, and they got to a point where teams were just starting to mid-block against De Zerbi's Brighton. Everton were the prime example of that when they beat them 5-1, and they just couldn't find solutions some of the time. So I'd expect to see Hürzeler be a little bit more flexible.
Yes, Seb, might that be a big thing for Hürzeler? We talk about, I remember when Ange Postecoglou first came in, wow, what is this? Wow. And then very quickly they go, we see you coming. You have to really adapt, especially at the Premier League, your tactics to every game, because you can't go out with that gun-ho attitude, surely.
No, and this is a little bit of an unknown territory, because you have to remember what St. Pauli's squad was, which was, it doesn't have anything like the range of talent that Brighton do, but also the range of different options and tactical flexes that are now available to him. I think at St. Pauli, certainly in the Zweite Bundesliga, which is a strange division, if you can be functional and smart and you can get your set pieces in order and you can keep the ball well, you can go a very long way in that competition, because it's full of these massive clubs that just can't get the house in order. So it's a bit of a strange environment. Also, I don't think there's a lot of variation in Hürzeler's football last season, but because he had to navigate some kind of pretty fundamental tactical obstacles. He had no real... he had number 9s in his squad, but I wouldn't say that he had a featured goal scorer who played as a 9. So he was kind of dependent upon moving his attacking midfielders around. He didn't quite have the ball player he wanted in the centre of defence. So he moved Eric Smith, who is he's kind of a Swedish holding midfielder, really, back into the middle centre-back position. He kind of reimagined Jackson Irvine and Marcel Hartl as midfielders who'd played together for a long time, but started to do slightly different things. There was no match-to-match reinvention. And I think one of the telling things, which I suppose when you start as he has done at Brighton and people are kind of cooing over the quality of the football, one of the things he did is their set pieces were really, really, really good. At both ends, they were very, very resilient with against the ball, but really good with it. And it wasn't rocket science. They had a lot of good delivery. Pacarada in his first season, Hartl in his second, good targets. Irvine, of course, was a really dependable target attacking wise. So I think he kind of depended upon a few fairly consistent tenets. So I don't know. I think this is going to be something we all discover together rather than something I'm able to kind of call back to from the past.
Okay. Well, let's delve a bit deeper into him, Seb. You sort of started speaking about Fabian Hürzeler at the top, and youngest manager in the Premier League. Everyone keeps telling us that he's actually younger than the league itself. But what I found fascinating about him, especially researching, is they actually, as Liam said, he hasn't played much football. He retired in his 20s, early 20s, I think, which probably gives you a good sense that managerial kind of prowess was really something he was really focused on. What's his reputation in Germany?
Well, as a player, he didn't have much of a reputation. One of my friends actually played against him when they were teenagers, and he said he's a very smart midfielder, but he's a bit of a wild man, like a bit tempestuous. But he played regional Bavarian football. He spent a long time in the Bayern Munich academy in their system, and I think you can see that in some of the things he believes in today. He said that to me the first time I went to meet him. He said, this is fundamentally, I may not have become the player I wanted to become, but all the things that I believe in came from Bayern Munich and his time in their academy. I think, that there are, as a person, he's kind of what you see. He's pretty forthright. He doesn't much care for the age thing. When I first met him, it was 6 weeks after he'd taken over at St. Pauli, and he's not keen on, especially in Germany, because when you talk about age, people invariably compare you to Julian Nagelsmann, because that's just what happens. It's such an easy, lazy headline. And I get it. He's broken a Premier League record. But I think if you were to ask him, and if he were to be honest, he would say he'd want to be assessed on his merits. And hopefully this age thing will wear off over time, and it won't, continue to be the first question asked every time he's interviewed. I think man management's a really important thing for him. When he got the opportunity to take the job at the Milan tour, he succeeded Timo Schultz, who he'd been assistant to, but had also been a former player at the club and was something close to a local legend. He's hugely popular, Timo Schultz. It didn't work out. It was right that he left, but he'd done wonderful things, nearly got them promoted. So Hürzeler spoke to Schultz about it, and everyone was good for him to go forward. He also assembled a kind of council of senior players, and he said to them, look, this is what's happened. This is the opportunity that I've been given at the time on an interim basis. Are you all happy? Because sometimes the relationship between assistant coach and players is very different. So he said, are you on board with me becoming manager and us sort of changing our dynamic? And they were, yeah, absolutely. They went forward. They were immediately better. A couple of months later, I went to interview Dapper Afolayan, who has had a very nomadic career in football. Last time he was in England, he played for Bolton Wanderers, but he came up through the West Ham Academy, made his Premier League debut for them. And I asked Dapper about Fabian, and he was just glowing, loves him, absolutely loves him. He was also fundamental to convincing Dapper to make a change in his life and come and play and live in Germany and embrace German culture and start learning German, all these things. And players love him. I think that's the thing that you have to remember with him. Like, if you play for him, there's a kind of an affinity that develops very, very quickly. Opposite managers, not so wild about Fabian Hürzeler, because he's pretty demonstrative. He's not the most passive guy in his technical area. And there was a little bit of animus between him and Tim Walter, and Tim Walter was coaching Haasval, the other Hamburg club. But players, fans, they really gravitate towards him. And it's not just, there's no jingoism to it. He's an extremely smart coach and an extremely good communicator. He taught me through some of his tactics, and I'm an absolute tactical dunce. And yet I have a clear picture of what he's trying to achieve, right? So that's the acid test. He makes it idiot proof if he can make me understand. But yeah, like he takes every box. He's I think the expectation was probably not that he'd go to the Premier League immediately, so quickly. But everybody I spoke to in Germany said if he comes up with Pauli and if he keeps Pauli in the Bundesliga, his next job will be Stuttgart maybe, or like a really, really big club. And so, yeah, the trajectory is not a surprise given his abilities.
Yeah, Liam, there was a bit in the post-match after Brighton beat Manchester United, and Hürzeler was talking about Danny Welbeck and how like he's actually older than him, which is kind of strange being in the same team. But I thought there was something about him that showed a bit of humility as well. He was like, yeah, but he's also really good for me on the sidelines because I can learn from his experience. And I wonder whether what he's bringing to the Premier League, and as Seb said, is quite interesting in terms of his age is his age, but we're surrounded by an industry that's about tradition and how much you've won, and let's see what you can offer. Actually, let's just judge him on what he does with the team.
Yeah, I think the age thing is probably more of a blame from the media than how anyone in the stadium or speaking on sort of like a staff perspective or from the players. players, as Seb says, just want someone that will work with them, will work to make a good team, but also better the individuals that are there. And I think it's about, you know, joined up thinking and how you like to work. And I think smart coaches recognise that, you know, age has become quite a blurry thing now in football. I think because of how early certain players sort of come into careers, how some players will sort of actually come into careers quite late, and then it's a case of, okay, you might be, I think it's a big thing now, like with Raheem Sterling, when you look at, it's a bit of a tangent, but hopefully this will make sense, of someone who burst on the scene so young that when you look at his sort of minutes played, he's already played the amount of minutes that someone well into their 30s would have played. So, you know, this idea of this sort of perfect marker, I don't think really massively makes sense. It obviously looks sort of quite neat, and it is, I suppose, slightly funny to some in the sense of, Milner's older than him. I think Lewis Dunk probably is as well. But look, these are players that just want to get better, and they recognise if there's a smart person who's going to help improve them. I can't see why, you know, players, I think, I can't speak from a German perspective. Seb might be able to have something here, but I think the perspective is always, on English footballers specifically, that they're not the brightest, they're actually quite stupid, which is never true and academically doesn't stand up anyway. But yeah, this idea that I think players would have any reservations, I don't think would be true in the slightest.
I completely agree. Like, I think German football and English football are very similar in that respect. Like, I think everybody you meet in both games, all the players, I'm very rarely am I not impressed by the way players discuss and digest the game, and I think it's a myth from a completely different era, the idea that players are stupid.
Okay, well, let's get back to Hürzeler, because, you know, the first 7 signings this summer are from, I think, 7 different countries, Seb. This is going to be quite interesting in how he integrates these players with very different ideologies, coming from very different leagues for the Premier League as well, and in such quick succession, because you want to see results.
Yeah, it is, but then I suppose this is what we were saying about communication. Like, you know, if you're able to impart what you believe in, and if you're able to clearly instruct players in terms of what you want, then does it really matter? I mean, I don't want to be the guy that kind of draws the comparison yet again between Brighton and St. Pauli, because they are so different. But then look at the composition of nationalities at the club, and look at where the different players come from. Like, you had at times 2 or 3 different languages being spoken within the same training session, and all sorts of players, all sorts of backstories, who have had, you know, a variety of different routes to that point, and yet was able to construct something hugely impressive, despite, I think, don't quote me on this, but it was roughly the 7th or 8th largest wage spend in the Zweite Bundesliga last season. It's enormously impressive. So not runaway champions quite, but champions, and, you know, promotion seeming a certainty from probably early Easter onwards. So I have no reservations about that. And also, you know, that in itself is not a unique situation. This is football. Players come from everywhere. Players, you know, now I think a lot of players, going back to what we were talking about there with players being stupid. Well, you know, when you talk to a lot of players that sort of join clubs, in some cases, they've already learned their new language before they get there. It's enormously impressive what some of these guys are willing to do in terms of their preparation, and also their savvy in assembling people around them who allow them to be prepared for new situations. So the days of, if they even existed, the days of a player turning up and not speaking a word of a language or not understanding anything about the environment they're walking into, they're gone. Certainly at the top level, certainly a club like Brighton, who, you know, whose due diligence is so strong. So I have no reservations there at all.
Yeah, there's a wonderful clip of Conor Gallagher at Atletico Madrid speaking his first few words of Spanish, and you're thinking, this is very new for sort of English players to go abroad and actually even attempt it. So you might have a point there, Seb, for sure.
So Jamie Gittins at Borussia Dortmund, he did his first interview in German over the summer, which, you know, given everybody in Germany speaks English, so he could get away with never speaking a word of German if he really wanted to, but has been learning, has put himself in a position where he's willing to do that. He's 20 years old, like, and yet he's willing to do that work in his spare time. And he's not the only one. There are all sorts of footballers who do exactly the same thing. His stories never really come to light. So it's more typical of the industry, I think, now.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Seb. Right, Liam, I was going to speak about, you know, how actually it's not even an age thing anymore, really, because I was, you know, Danny Welbeck, James Milner, Danny Welbeck's 33, James Milner's 38, and I was going to sort of speak about how tricky it must be to have players who are older than the manager. But I think we've sort of covered that really. But I'm just now thinking, you know what? How important is it for a Brighton squad that's got so many new additions to have those stalwarts who've been there, done it, and actually are at the top at their level, as we've seen already?
Oh, completely. And I mean, that's just how you build a smart team in any form, right? You want players at the peak. You want youngsters coming through. You want players who are experienced. I think that's something they made a big effort in terms of when they first sort of qualified for European football, was trying to get in players with that sort of European experience as well. It was a thing previously with Adam Lallana, so they've taken sort of ex-England internationals, Welbeck as well, and Milner, that have played at levels that Brighton have never even got sort of close to reaching, at least not until very recent years. And I think that's just something that, I'm not to discredit Fabian Hürzeler here at all, but that's something that Tony Bloom and the people, the core components of the club, I think are always going to always want to build it on. It's about having a sound logical structure before you even want to start talking about the idea of using sort of data to help recruit, or how they sort of build a pathway from academy to first team, or their preparation to be at times a selling club. It's all about, how do you logically, sensibly build a smart team, and I think any coach now will sort of tell you that's the recipe. I think Gareth Southgate sort of was repeatedly talking about that sort of before the Euros, and that's like we were saying before with sort of myth busting the age thing. That's just a management thing now. That's how you have to sort of build a team.
Yeah, for sure. Seb, what does, I guess, success this season look like? I'm hoping Brighton don't get into a relegation battle. I sort of don't foresee it. It's probably too early, but I don't foresee it. Zerbi finishing 6th in the 2022-23 season. That's quite a big one to top. A bit of, upmanship there. But is that expected of him, do you reckon?
No, I mean, I'd be surprised if there were anything other than a really solid mid-table season. I think what will happen is there will be the occasional bump, and there'll be a moment when you have to allow people to when you come into the Premier League, because there's so much focus on it, and because clubs are so overstocked with analysts, there's going to be a moment which teams adjust to whatever Brighton are doing. But this is true of anybody that comes in. Like you mentioned, Ange Postecoglou, right? At the beginning of the podcast, same thing, right? Like people see what you're doing, and it becomes this kind of, it's like a research and development league, isn't it? But I would be stunned if they're not just a very, very solid Premier League team, and then improving next year. It would amaze me.
Yeah. All right, Liam. Let's talk about Brighton spending. Spent a fair bit. Talks about 200 million at the top. I think outspending the likes of PSG, Bayern, Manchester United in this window in particular. We talk about the recruitment and sort of how great that has been. Can you just explain for anyone who doesn't already know how Brighton are unable to unearth these incredible gems from various parts of the world that probably no one's looking at sometimes?
See, that's the one thing I push back on. I think they're looking at players everyone else is looking at. I think the idea that anyone isn't looking at these leagues isn't true. I think they're just prepared to be the club in between. So they aren't a Liverpool, a Chelsea, a Big Six club, or even, going back to the point about what success might look like as well. Tony Bloom's ambition is to be consistently a top 10 Premier League team. So that's where they see themselves aspiring to be, or close to that. They're getting around that now. But I think they're just prepared to say, let's spend a few £1 million, and it's sometimes increasingly sort of going up. We'll go into the Ecuadorian, the Paraguayan league. We'll shop in outside of Europe's top 5 major leagues as well. I don't even think it's necessarily sort of taking a risk on this player, but I think the people maybe overestimate sort of the scouting, as if they're suddenly pulling out players who, Alexis McAllister was not a World Cup winner when he joined Brighton. A player that sort of then came through, had time to develop. They've consistently had coaches who I think can build either quite specific systems or be really, really flexible, sort of between Potter and De Zerbi, and in both ways that can allow individuals to shine. They've always sort of been, about really having tactical coaches that can then raise the profile of players, which is why I think some people maybe go, when you take those players out of a system that was not necessarily built around them, but really built for them, they panic and go, oh my God, why does he look nowhere near as good now? And I think they're good at selling then at the right time as well. You look at the fees they've acquired for players. Obviously, over £100 million for Moises Caicedo. You're looking at, I've just got Euros figures up here, but €65 million for Marc Cucurella, 58 for Benjamin White, over 40 for McAllister, 30 for Bissouma. And that was just consistently, selling sort of 70 to £100 million, €100 million, sort of, not quite every single window, but every single season. And they've kind of let that accumulate a little bit, which if people cast their minds back, maybe even sort of 4 or 5 months ago now towards the tail end of the season, Roberto De Zerbi was quite vocally quite unhappy with, and this is sort of pure speculation from my part, but looked like it might have had a role in sort of burning bridges between him and the club's hierarchy, where he was saying there's times where, the medical staff are picking the starting 11 because he doesn't have enough fit players, he wants more depth. So I think it's, I'd be fascinated in, again, an alternative reality to see how De Zerbi might have done with this crop of players that have now come in, the exact sort of squad depth that he'd like.
Yeah, we've crunched the numbers, including players that have also gone out this season and also players that have gone off to play in the Championship. I think it's about £347 million in sales for Brighton, which is insane money. We talk about balancing the books. That is balancing the books at its finest. It's absolutely stunning. Seb, do any clubs in Germany operate like this? Are there any comparisons we can find in terms of, maybe not necessarily selling, but in terms of recruitment as well?
Probably not strength of recruitment. The clubs that have good reputations for recruitment now, Eintracht Frankfurt have done good business. In a quieter way, really, than a club like Brighton. Also in a very different way under different circumstances. RB Leipzig's talent ID is very good. That's an entirely different podcast, I accept that. Some of the clubs that you traditionally associate with it have slipped a little bit. I think Borussia Dortmund's reputation is not what it was in terms of importing talent. I think what's interesting in Germany is the way in which other leagues are now viewed. So for instance, the faith in the talent ID and development that occurs in Belgian football, for instance, and then if you go into Belgium and you talk to people that do their recruiting there, they talk about how the reputation of some of the Scandinavian leagues has changed for a variety of reasons, because you get a lot of good players there, but also because the economics of dealing with that market mean that you can take a little bit of a risk on a player, and if it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world. You don't have to kind of liquidate your club afterwards. So I suppose how you view clubs depends upon what you want from them. And I guess from a German perspective, you're not getting many clubs, Pascal Gross to Dortmund aside, that's a bit of a different issue, but Brighton aren't a sort of a club that many German teams are able to buy from anymore, just because the wealth of the Premier League and the kind of financial primacy of the division means that it's just not possible or efficient to do it. But yeah, no one that's, I wouldn't even describe it as being purely about recruitment either. I think Brighton are viewed as an organisation where a lot of things are aligned. You have a lot of employees in the right roles, a lot of the right employees in the right roles, and so everything kind of works in a nice balance. There's probably more German clubs where that's not happening at the moment, really, where there's a bit more dysfunction. But clearly, Brighton's reputation is extremely high, and I think that was a big reason why Hürzeler left St. Pauli. I know it's a smaller club, but that was quite a thing to leave behind, take them up to the Erste Bundesliga, and very much a local hero. But then, how often do you get the opportunity to go to a club where everything is so well run? Not very often. So that says it all.
For sure. Liam, we just spoke about, the amount of money they've managed to fetch for the likes of Caicedo, Cucurella, Ben White, McAllister as well. There's a lot of clubs out there, we've spoken about them, that just don't know how to sell properly or don't get enough profit out of those players. Is that always part of the plan for Brighton when they do recruit? Is that sell-on potentially has to be worth it? And is that also part of the self-generating kind of way of balancing their books in general?
Yeah, I think Cucurella is the prime example, right? I think he signed a 5-year deal, and the expectation was he definitely won't see out these 5 years. And then, obviously Chelsea came calling, and I remember lots of fans kicking up a fuss saying, "Why are you charging so much for this player?" Well, because he's got 4 years left on his deal. I was on the pod with you, Ayo, when we're talking about Ivan Toney, and one of the big reasons why there's sort of the panic now of can you sell him is because, as it happens with plenty of clubs, it was a similar thing I think with Liverpool and some of their top talent. Brighton just, and again, this is something people don't normally see, just really good at getting contracts sorted well in advance and in really sort of smart, clever ways where it's not, it's not tying a player down unfairly, but it's saying we're making sure that you're our player for as long as we need, and in a way that's going to mean that clubs are going to have to come with an awful lot of money. And there's a really straightforward explanation for that. Tony Bloom, the chairman, the owner, is a professional gambler. Like he's made his, people talk about his betting industry, but this guy plays high stakes poker. So I imagine sort of going into a negotiations or a few emails with another Premier League, chairman or owner is probably quite easy for him in comparison.
Yeah, just turns up with a pair of sunglasses, doesn't say a word. You cannot see the eyes. Gents, let's end it there. Brighton take on Arsenal on the 31st of August away at the Emirates. Let's see how those tactics of those players turn up for them in that match, because Mikel Arteta is definitely turning out to be quite the tactician these days himself. Right, Liam, Seb, thanks for your time, and we'll be back tomorrow delving into the biggest footballing story of the day. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.